We can probably get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ana Martinez-Hume. I'm with Michigan Divest. And if you don't know anything about Michigan Divest, we are a statewide coalition of human rights activists, active and retired public employees, and representatives from multiple organizations, including labor, legal, and interfaith groups around Michigan. And for the past year, we have embarked on a Break the Bonds campaign to divest our state of Michigan retirement system from Israeli government bonds. And in November, we learned that we were successful in ending a 30-year relationship between the state of Michigan retirement system and the Development Corporation for Israel, where these bonds were underwritten. So the purpose of tonight's webinar is to just talk about what we did, the strategies that worked, and also to just spread some awareness about the fact that we had this victory. So the hope here is that this spreads awareness, but is also an opportunity to maybe share some insights or provide some helpful information for others who are working on divestment campaigns in other contexts or even in other states, because I think there's some folks here who are joining us from outside of Michigan. Forgive me if I'm looking, I'm paying attention. I have multiple screens going, so forgive me if I'm looking this way. So I want to just invite you all to share, if you feel comfortable, your name, if you're part of an organization, and if you're from Michigan or if you're from outside of Michigan, from another state, whatever you feel comfortable, if you could share that in the chat. Oh, it's not advancing my slides. Oh, there we go. Okay. So some quick housekeeping and an agenda for our time together tonight. So we're going to spend about, I don't know, 3/4 of the time just talking about this victory, the approaches that we took, the strategies, and then the rest of the time we'll use for Q&As. If you have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat throughout the meeting tonight. Mohammed, who's here tonight, it will be chiming in the chat and fielding your questions as best he can. And then you will have the opportunity to have questions at the end. So a Q&A, you can raise your hand and you'll be unmuted. As you can tell, everybody has been muted. Just, for sake of, we don't know who's all in the room. We don't know who's going to be, who might be disruptive. So that being said, harassment will not be tolerated. You will be removed from the meeting. And you probably noticed when you entered that the meeting is being recorded. So we're just recording it so that we can share this back with some folks who couldn't make it to the meeting tonight. Okay. So with that, I'm going to shift over to a little bit of grounding for our time together. So, we want to begin by, reminding us about the movement for a divestment is just one part of the larger movement for the liberation of Palestine. So our campaign targeted Israel bonds held within the state of Michigan retirement system. And specifically, a $10 million Israel bond that was purchased November 2023. It was about 3 weeks after the genocide began. So I want to take just a moment to introduce 2 members of Michigan Divest who are here today, who are Palestinian Michiganders and members of Michigan Divest. We're going to take just a moment to kind of ground us in why divestment from Israel bonds matters. So I have with us Dr. Saeed Abu Bakr and Dr. Muhammad Abu Shark. Let me unmute both of you so that you can share. Go. All right, take it away.
Greetings, everybody, and happy Monday. As Anna said, my name is Saeed Abu Bakr. I'm on the steering committee of Michigan Divest and also on the leadership collective of Kalamazoo, Nonviolent Opponent of War, KNOW. I came to the US in 1977, and I am currently professor and founder of the chemical engineering program at Western Michigan University. I am a third generation Palestinian refugee where my parents and grandparents were kicked out by force from Haifa on May 7, 1948. My dad at gunpoint was shipped in a ship to Beirut, and my mother has to walk 20 miles with 3 children to her village near Jenin. I really wholeheartedly appreciate the work that Michigan Divest and other solidarity group does in the name of humanity, justice, and freedom. Talking to people on the ground in Gaza and in the West Bank, I heard from my relatives in the West Bank how happy they are about the news that we divested in Michigan, because they tell me that the Israeli bond is outside the Israeli budget, and they go directly to the settlement, and the settlement is harassing, the settlers are harassing Palestinians every day and everywhere, burning houses, burning cars, and everything. So the 3 points that I used, quick 3 points I used regarding divestment. One, from morality point of view, that tax dollars money should not go kill children. Second is community. We better off spending the money in our community rather than in a foreign country that is apartheid. And third one, even from economic point of view, that there are other options. So again, thank you everyone for coming, and I go now to Muhammad.
Thank you, sir, and thanks everybody for being here. My name is Muhammad Abu Shark. My family comes from a city called Asqalan, that's 10 kilometers north of Gaza. I have, I should say, tens, perhaps a couple hundred relatives in Gaza under the war, hearing the stories every day over 2 years. Over the time of the war and continuing till now was an experience you've all gone through, and you know what it feels. When I heard from, Matt reached out to me and talked about the investment, talked about the investment the state has in the retirement funds. Our money collectively as Michiganders is directly participating in Israel's war. That's, the opposite of what we certainly our intention was, and the opposite of what we are supposed to do. So this was certainly a call for action, and it's a call for action for all of us. My relatives in Gaza were aware. I try and make them aware of what's happening, the winds there, and I want to tell you, everybody in Palestine follows, and they have their eyes on what's happening in the US because, like it or not, we lead the world. So with that in mind, whatever we do, wherever we do in any state, tons of eyes are on us. The government's eyes are on us, and Israel's eyes are on us. So when we raise our voice, we have a huge impact, and that's what happened here in Michigan. That's what we've experienced here in Michigan, and we've seen that impact. And I hope and pray that all of you, your efforts in your states are successful, and we're here to support you, and we're really, really proud of you. And thanks for listening. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Muhammad. Thank you, Saeed. So we want to move now to talk a little bit about the timeline it took for us to accomplish this victory. there's a lot here on the screen. I will try to keep this as short as I can. But so the Treasury Department invested in a $10 million Israel bond about 1 month into the genocide in Gaza. And this was an investment of the public pensions, so public employee pensions in the state. So our campaign really took almost an entire year before we reached this victory. So I just wanted to give a snapshot of what that looked like, because this didn't happen overnight, obviously. So really, it began in July of 2024. Matt Clark, who's on the call today, did some initial FOIA requests for public records within the Michigan Treasury Department, trying to look for Israel bonds, and found some. So during that summer, that really involved doing research around the retirement system and building an initial coalition to launch the campaign, which happened in October of that year. And that started with our first action at the State of Michigan Investment Board, where we brought demands to the board to decline to reinvest this $10 million bond in another bond when it matured in November of this year. So it was just a 2-year bond. And then over the course of the year, we had a lot of really ongoing activities and actions. So we were continuing to do research. We submitted multiple FOIA requests. We did a ton of outreach to unions and pensioners who had pensions in the retirement system. We worked on building our statewide coalition, and we also launched a petition. Throughout the year, we attended all of the quarterly State of Michigan Investment Board meetings, which are here in the Capitol. And then during this time, we also had private meetings with key investment officers within the Michigan Treasury. So we're going to dive in a little bit more about details about some of these things. And ultimately, these are the things that helped lead us to victory in November. So the bond matured on November 1st. And we learned through a Freedom of Information Act request that the Treasury Department no longer holds any Israel bonds of any types, including the bonds from the Development Corporation for Israel, which this particular bond was from there. So with that, I wanted to shift over to Matt Clark, who's a member of Michigan Divest, who's part of our research team, who's going to talk a little bit about why we focused particularly on Israel bonds. Do I have to unmute you, Matt? I think I do. Hold on. That works.
Hi, everybody. Okay. First of all, thanks everybody for being here. You know, this work for the past year plus has really gotten me in touch with some incredible people in the state and across the country, working for some really doing some great work all over, and it's been a real blessing to be in this network of people who are really committed to doing this kind of work. So to talk a little bit about Israel bonds, why we focused on them. Basically, they're a strategic and attainable target for divestment. I think really 101 for building this campaign was something that we could affect, and something that would be a real win and would have real implications. And I was initially inspired by people in other parts of the country who were doing Israel bond divestment. I saw some and read about some divestment activists who were doing work in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County. And it was such a powerful way to connect local governments and state governments to the genocide going on in Palestine, because an Israel bond is a direct investment that state and local governments and public investors give to Israel. It's a direct investment that goes in their general fund and is used by the state of Israel to do all sorts of horrible things. in the West Bank and basically perpetuate the genocide. So it was a real powerful way to connect those financial bonds and looking especially in light of our politicians basically effectively declaring their support for the past 2+ years for the genocide. We have to sort of take matters in our own hands and get creative about examining the financial relationships that our whole structure is built around. And it was very interesting to sort of dig into that and see where some of these connections are and the real financial connections that we can disrupt. Israel bonds is also so it's a financial target. It's an ideological target. Particularly after October 7th, governments all over, state and local governments all over the country were ramping up their support in purchasing Israel bonds as a way to show their support for Zionism at this horrible time. In the state of Michigan, that's when they purchased a $10 million Israel bond in November, as Anna had said. They had held Israel bonds for about 30 years, but they made a significant increase in their prior investment when their prior bond matured, and then they amped it up to 10 million in November 2023. It's also a good target because the Israel bonds investment movement is a national movement, and there were a lot of really inspiring people who knew about this issue. And it didn't feel like we were doing this work alone. We could sort of plug ourselves into a network of people who were working on this and learning together, and we can inspire each other, we collaborate with each other, and our win and other Israel bond investment wins across the country are affecting each other. We're having effects on the bigger global picture and the national international picture. So it was a really prime target. And I'll talk a little bit about how I looked into the state of Michigan retirement system in a second. But another important part is it's a limited target. And on the left, I'm on the left, and we want to sort of remake the whole world because there's so much that needs to be worked on. And so there's a line that we kind of had to draw as a target that we could effectuate and that we could challenge. And we could succeed, and it would be a real target, a real attainable target, but not something merely symbolic. The state Michigan retirement system has about $115 billion in assets, so there's certainly a lot more that we could target. I mean, $10 million is a lot of money, but if you look compared to 115 billion, it's not that much. I mean, we could have drawn our line around 500 million. We could have, let's say we found 1% of their holdings had problems with them, which I wouldn't be surprised at all. That would still be over $1 billion. And as Anna will go into a bit more of the sort of inside-outside strategy, if we had a giant target, it'd be very hard to attain, and it would be hard for the Treasury to take us seriously, and the state Michigan Investment Board to take us seriously. We very likely would not have gotten a meeting if we were talking about you need to dump $1 billion in this and that. So we were very strategic about focusing on Israel bonds as a sort of singular target. And we think the movement desperately needs a win. It's a real win that was attainable, and I think that mattered in sort of drawing a line around something that could be attainable mattered. I mean, it's sort of a chain, the weak link in the chain that we have broken, and we hope that we will now find other links that we can work on. So I basically began to look everywhere that I could find in the state of Michigan for Israel bonds. Didn't know a whole lot about the financial intricacies or the legal intricacies at that point. And turns out that state retirement system, which I basically didn't even know exists until I just got a big booklet of all their holdings and found Israel bonds. It was time to learn about what this is. I mean, at the time I didn't know, but it turns out Michigan law allows retirement systems to invest. It gives them a lot more leeway to invest in international bonds, which are Israel bonds. There's a thing called, if anybody wants to sort of get into all this stuff, there's Public Act 314 in 1965. It's Michigan law that allows them to invest in Israel bonds. And other public entities in the state of Michigan that are not, managing retirement funds are they have a lot greater restrictions on what they can invest in. They're subject to a different law, Public Act 20, 1943, which probably prohibits them from investing in Israel bonds. So, we didn't find any cities, we didn't find any local governments that had those holdings. We found the state retirement system, which sort of necessitated us mobilizing the whole state and looking into that. Anna, I think we can get into the strategy part of this, right?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So that's just kind of an overview about why we chose to focus on Israel bonds. So we want to spend some time now talking about what strategies worked for our campaign. So we'll talk a little bit in more detail about what we did, how we did it, why, in the hopes that some of this might be actionable, or for those of you maybe in other states, maybe some of this will be reaffirming for some of the work that you're already doing. So we're gonna, I think, first talk, and I hand it back over to Matt, talk about one of the things that was really key, which was the strategy we took in regards to our FOIA requests, our public information requests. So I'll pass it back over to Matt. I think I have to unmute you again. There you go.
Right. So FOIA is Freedom of Information Act is kind of like an egg-headed place to start, but it's really important to have this sort of figured out, because a FOIA strategy is and a public records request strategy was essential to building this whole thing. So most states have very similar FOIA laws or public records laws. There's a federal one, and then the state of Michigan has one. Most states are effectively close to the same. So what we need to do, I mean, Freedom of Information Act requests, you don't want to get bogged down with a lot of costs and a lot of unnecessary red tape and paperwork. So it really is an art to get to be very targeted in how you get this information. So our FOIA strategy was to minimize costs and minimize controversy, because in Michigan, which is similar to a lot of states, I think, they can charge you. If you put in a public records request, the public entity can charge you, especially if it's a big request. And if it's a controversial request, you're more likely to get charged. So if you're talking about Israel or Palestine, any of that stuff, that's going to be, it's a potential red flag. And then convert, the other part of it is if you ask for a lot of information, then you could get a bill and they say, well, we'll give you this, but we're going to charge you a lot of money. So and sometimes that is sinister. Sometimes they are gatekeeping information, but a lot of times, administratively they have a point. I mean, if you ask for like every purchase that they've made in the last 20 years, they're going to have to dig through a lot of paperwork, and they're going to charge you a lot of money. So the first thing I requested, we actually didn't even submit a FOIA request. I was about to, but with a lot of these things, I mean, there are human beings on the other end that you're asking for information. So if you could sort of build some level of relationship, there are many good reasons to do that. So basically, I called, the Michigan Department of Treasury after I began to look into the state retirement system. I learned that they had like the public relations liaison, and I emailed him as just saying, I was looking through some of their financial records, and some of their annual reports said, contact the Treasury for more information. So I didn't say anything about why I wanted it. Didn't say anything about how, I'm looking to divest from Israel bonds. I just asked for any of their international bonds, and they said, well, that's going to be hard for us to do, but we'll just give you an entire 97 pages of our assets. It was like, okay, that's fine. So I got it. Did a OCR, convert to text, did a Control F, and I found some Israel stuff in there. So I kind of had an idea that we were onto something. And that was the start of it from a sort of Freedom of Information Act strategy standpoint. It didn't cost anything at that point. I mean, throughout this whole process, we put in 3 additional Freedom of Information Act requests. We requested an updated full asset list, which they did charge us for. And we needed that first of all, be updated to get updated information. We also, we're sort of had an idea to compare Israel bonds to some of their other assets to just sort of do some internal research. It didn't ultimately pan out into anything we used, but it was useful information for us to dig around. But some of the more important information that was sort of directly on point is we made an additional Freedom of Information Act request for the specific Israel bonds information. By this time, we had shown up to some of these quarterly investment board meetings, so they knew what we were up to, and we could sort of, we could sort of play. Our hand was already played from that standpoint. So we asked about their some of the Israel bonds that they've held, and that they're currently holding, because one of the other things that's important if you're thinking about Israel bonds divestment that we had to learn was, like, what is an Israel bond? It's a kind of unique investment, and especially for people like myself who don't necessarily come from an investment background, there are different types of Israel bonds. There's 3 different types of Israel bonds. There's what are called sovereign debt bonds, which are issued by the Israeli government, can be traded like any sort of quote unquote normal bond. And corporations issue these kind of bonds, other governments do, and it goes to an investment manager. Somebody purchases them, and then if they decide a week later that they want to sell them, they can, based on market, projections and whatever. There's this sort of more politicized and nefarious Israel bond that is issued by what's called the Development Corporation for Israel, and that is the Israel Bonds organization that's highly politicized. Those type of bonds, which is a type that our retirement system held, those cannot be sold on the secondary market, which means if you buy an Israel bond, like in our case, was bought for a 2-year bond, that cannot be sold. The state was stuck with it until it matured. And the way that those bonds work, private investors don't like to buy them very much because they can't be traded. And they like to, the market goes up and down and does all sorts of things. And some of these private managers like to, be able to have the flexibility. But these DCI bonds, Development Corporation for Israel bonds, you're stuck with them. Well, what that means is Israel bonds as an institution has to build relationships with government entities, which is what happened here. The state retirement system has held them for about 30 years. And that was built through political relationships. So that's how DCI, Development Corporation for Israel, works. And we had to learn that. And it's also very important for what we were doing, because the maturity date is everything. I mean, nothing could have been done until this bond matured, at which point they don't have to repurchase their bond, as they have basically rolled it over and repurchased it for decades. And we broke that chain. And we needed to know when it matured, and we needed to know all these terms and how Israel bonds work. So that Freedom of Information request is very important. We looked directly at the bond offering on all this kind of stuff. And that directed our strategy. The other type of Israel bond, just because we're on it, is what's called the USAID, U.S. guaranteed bond that's done through the USAID program. It's an Israel bond that is guaranteed by the U.S. government. Kind of a rare type of Israel bond, and didn't exist here, so we won't go into that. It's kind of its own little animal. But that was another important Freedom of Information Act request. And then the third and kind of like most fun and dramatic request that we went through. Well, actually 4. Now that I think about it, I mean, we did a sort of end FOIA request is to make sure they didn't have another Israel bond, but the third one we need to know when to pull it out, because this is the one that is like going to not make you very many friends on the other side. But we requested all their emails that mention anything about Israel bonds, and it's public records, so they had to give it to us, and we learned some kind of like interesting things. We waited quite a bit until we sort of pulled that card. And we learned that they were talking about us right after our first attendance at the meeting. We learned that they had actually looked into our divestment demand to like see if it was a feasible thing. So we learned a little bit about the sort of internal communications. We didn't find any at that point. We didn't really find any like real interesting juicy things. But I'm an attorney. I do litigation, and when you get certain emails, one email that is like a huge piece of information can just totally change the case. So it was worth sort of fishing around for that information. So that's kind of how the FOIA strategy worked. We did at the end of the process, just so people get an idea, if you're doing these things on your own, we ended up spending about $1,000 total in Freedom of Information Act costs. That included, we had to appeal, do an internal appeal of the FOIA, knocked it down by maybe $500. But they were generally pretty helpful. I mean, a lot of government entities will like fight you to the grave on this stuff, and sometimes you have to go to court. But we were very careful not to be too aggressive, to push them into fighting too much about information. Yeah, so that's the FOIA end of it. I think we can now talk about the other part of our strategy, one other piece of our strategy, which is mastering our understanding of the public retirement system structure. As I mentioned, I didn't even know anything about this, what this thing was called the State of Michigan Retirement System. And we had to learn about it. It's a very inductive process. It's like we found an Israel bond there, so we have to throw ourselves into this world. And we learned the state retirement system. It's about 500,000 public employees in the state. We had to learn who's in it. It's mostly public school employees. And it's one of these things where year after year, as with a lot of these what are called defined benefit pensions, these are like the old school pensions that are really good, where instead of having a 401k, where it's up to you to invest well, it's up to whatever investment manager you hire to invest well. A defined benefit plan, the burden is on the public, is on your boss basically to invest well. They have to pay you a certain amount, and they have to come up with the money on their end to do that. So those are the defined benefit pensions that are in this system. It's about 80% or so public school employees. That's not just teachers; it's largely teachers, but any type of public school employee has the option to be in this plan. It's also state retirees. I say retirees; it was state employees, but it was after I think a certain point in 1997 that employees were in Michigan were not given the option to be in defined benefit pensions. So we had to figure out all of this stuff. We had to figure out who was in it, because that's who we were targeting. We wanted to connect with people who were direct participants in the system, but direct pensioners, and we did do that. But we also, we were able to broaden our campaign as much as possible, because these are public pensions that are invested by the state in the name of the state of Michigan, and publicly financed by people who pay to property taxes to schools, and people who pay taxes to the state. So we were able to frame it in such a way that anybody in the state of Michigan, any resident, has a say, and and can be a part of demanding divestment. That was an important part of it. And we also had to really research. We had to read the entire the Public Employee Retirement System Investment Act, which is the big law that sort of governs all this stuff. There's certain executive orders, the board's investment policy. That was really key to really understand that and have that level of sort of micro level of detail, because we found it was a very subtle distinction, but extremely important. Sort of digging through all this stuff, we found that the state investment board policy allowed the somebody called the chief investment officer to invest. They had carte blanche to invest funds. They didn't need to run it by the investment board. If it's investments that were less than 1.5% of their total of the total retirement system holdings. So we initially wanted to target the state investment board, which is 5 appointees by the governors, led by the state treasurer and other appointees. So these are like politicians basically, and we were initially thinking of it in terms of us having to convince a majority of this 5-member investment board to maybe have some sort of divestment policy or take some sort of divestment action. And that was tough, because there was nobody on the board that was, that was good on Palestine that we knew of. There were some people who were okay, but there was nobody that indicated they were going to be helpful in that respect. So us really mastering how the state retirement system worked allowed us to shift focus from this investment board, this whole political body, to literally one single person, the chief investment officer, who's unlike a political appointee, is a state employee, a functionary who makes these investments. And he was the one who made the call, and he was a little more insulated from the sort of political pressures that other people would be, and he was willing to work with us. So we ended up building a rapport and a relationship with him, which I think Anna will get into later in this presentation. But knowing how that worked was really key to this whole thing. I'll talk for a second about networking with unions and pensioners. I'm a union lawyer, so this is the most fun part of the whole thing for me, like reaching out to unions and getting their support. It's a beautiful thing when labor stands with Palestine, and we made that happen in a lot of key ways. How we made those connections and the way that the unions relate to this is that they are part of the system. You know, teachers, state employees. It's a highly unionized workforce, and those unions don't directly didn't control the pension funds. They didn't control the investments. They didn't make those investment decisions, but what they did is represented their members. So if we got unions to speak out on this issue, it carried some weight. So how we made those connections, we initially were thinking in terms of state level or even regional or national level unions, because some of the teachers unions, the National Education Associations, and some other unions had made some positive statements on Palestine, and we thought we might be able to get somewhere with them. What we ended up doing is just working it out on the local union level. And what that meant is, we didn't have to mess with. I mean, if we would have got leads there, we would have gone on a bigger regional level, but it just didn't work that way. I think the higher you get in the union chain, the closer it's tied to politicians and Democratic Party politics. So we didn't really make a whole lot of leads on that higher sort of step in the chain. What we did do is, local unions, local teacher unions in our case, and some other types of unions. If you just know somebody, I called up a friend of mine who was a professor at one of the community colleges that was in the system. I told him about this. He was a longtime activist, David Soul, and he just made it happen. I didn't actually even know he was going to raise it, but what he did, he went to his union meeting, and then he calls down and said, "Hey, we just had our union meeting. We passed a resolution in support of your divestment." Of divesting from Israel bonds. Then we had the fourth largest community college in the state, the union, the AFT union that represented that faculty, passed something. It was kind of a piecemeal approach because there were other unions that we worked on for a very long time, and it wasn't quite so easy. And it was a bit more contentious, which is fine. I mean, with Palestine politics, we're used to that kind of thing. There were other local unions that wanted to put the membership, put the question to a full membership vote, and we made presentations at a membership meeting. And there were other unions that a lot of these local union meetings, they're not, not a whole lot of people go to them. So if that issue is raised, if you can get that issue raised at a meeting by the union, oftentimes that's all it takes. I mean, we've been working on this for a very long time, but we eventually got in touch with the president of the Dearborn Federation of Teachers. Folks across the country might know about Dearborn. It's a very important Arab American cultural city, and it's also the second largest participant in the Michigan public school employees retirement system. It was the second largest. Dearborn Public Schools is the second largest contributor. It's a very big public employer in this system. So we got that union on board, which represented about, I think, 1,400 public school employees. We talked to the retiree committee for one of the UAW locals that represented state retirees. It's kind of a piecemeal approach, and it took a lot of door knocking, and the leads that we got, we followed up on, and we ended up getting four unions that were on board with that. We could share some of the resolutions that were passed. It's helpful language. And it wasn't a big ask for the unions. I mean, it took some political courage, but the unions themselves did not have to restructure anything of their own internal, investments. This was only them demanding that the state managed public retirement system drop the Israel bonds. So it was a doable ask on all fronts. Um, let's see, Anna, I think we can talk about the inside strategy.
Yeah. So as Matt mentioned earlier, we had kind of an inside outside approach. So another key aspect of our strategy was having this inside warm working relationship with some of the key decision makers in the Michigan Treasury. And like Matt had mentioned, we learned through a lot of careful research around the structure of the Michigan Treasury and the various roles within it that the chief investment officer for the state was the person who we needed to get our demands in front of. So just a little more information about that. So we learned that the chief investment officer is responsible for managing assets that represent 1% or less of the investment portfolio. So in the case of Michigan's $115-ish billion retirement portfolio, this Israel bond, this $10 million Israel bond, fell within those parameters. So the chief investment officer became our target decision maker, not the board. So our inside approach was about how do we build a relationship with the chief investment officer? How do we get in a room with him? Because he was at all of the state of Michigan investment board meetings. He was at the table. But how did we get the ability to be in the same room with him? So we tried to build kind of a warm working relationship with the chief investment officer and the deputy chief investment officer. How did we get to these people? We cornered the treasurer after a state of Michigan investment board meeting. They were always very quick. I saw someone mentioned in the chat, like, they really didn't respond. That was just the protocol that they had. That was the typical approach. They don't engage with the public. And so they usually tried to leave the meetings right away. We cornered them. We asked for a meeting. And we learned that the Michigan treasurer, Treasurer Rachel Eubanks, had to green light the chief investment officer and deputy chief investment officer to meet with us. They could not meet with us without her approval. So it was at the behest of the treasurer, even though she wasn't part of those conversations. So we were a little pushy at the end of a meeting after being ignored, and we were like, we need a meeting, and they agreed. So what did this inside strategy look like? Forgive me, I'm looking at this. So we had multiple private meetings with the chief investment officer, deputy chief investment officer. I think we had 3 over the course of the year. And I just want to share that this inside strategy was really key because several things came out of it. Well, overall, I think it lent to a Treasury Department that did not fight back. They did not do anything that necessarily put roadblocks in front of us to not achieve what we wanted to achieve. Not that they were being super friendly or anything, but so this relationship kind of resulted in a number of things. So our FOIA requests were reduced. I think Matt mentioned that. That happened after our first meeting, which was wonderful because I think we got nearly $1,000 bill on one of them. We saw a willingness to want to meet with us and an openness. They were providing information to us, including information we didn't even ask for. So I want to share that in these kind of one-on-one meetings we had with the Chief Investment Officer, we came prepared. So one of our strategies was we had a laundry list of key questions that we wanted to ask them and get answers to. And we worked together with our coalition. You know, we had strategizing meetings about what information we need to know, what questions we want to ask. So we asked questions around gaining an understanding of the decision-making process, right? Whether it's formal or informal, combination of both of those things, right? How are decisions made? Who makes them? Under what circumstances? They loved to talk about their job. So this was a very warm way to build that initial relationship, is getting them to talk about what they do. We also asked them questions around investment considerations, factors that influence decisions to invest or decline to reinvest, and also the ethics that might be a little bit more maybe informal, right? Because there is the ethical investment policies that the Treasury Department abides by. A lot of that is by executive order or existing policy. We also ask questions around how they consider pension holder or taxpayer input into their investment decisions. And then kind of really importantly, we used these three meetings as an opportunity to also ask clarifying questions regarding public records information that we received from our FOIA requests, right? So getting them to explain things so that we didn't have to submit another FOIA, right? They would just tell us. And, you know, during these meetings, we tried to be friendly, warm, really trying to build this kind of working relationship and working and understanding between us. And it led to them wanting to meet with us again and again. In addition to this inside strategy, we had a larger outside kind of statewide strategy. And this really involved creating a structure that allowed for anyone to step in and step out, right? To the degree and capacity that they could. So I want to kind of drive home that we centered the message that regardless of whether you had a pension in the retirement system, in Michigan, everyone's taxpayer dollars are being invested in these bonds by the Treasury on their behalf, right? So that I think made a lot of sense to just the everyday person who started engaging with our campaign. And our outside strategy really consisted of different ways in which people could plug in and apply public pressure. So not just, networking with pension holders and unions like Matt talked about, and providing education in that space, but providing education to the broader, our broader communities about what bonds are, how they support apartheid and genocide. And so there were different ways that we kind of set up opportunities for people to plug in. So we had obviously public comment at the State of Michigan Investment Board meetings. These were in person and virtual. We had a toolkit that had talking points. We were, getting out information about the upcoming meetings, if things were canceled, if they were moved, because the meetings got shifted to a new location. Sometimes they got canceled. So we had that opportunity for people to plug in, share public comment. We also submitted a petition to the Treasury Department. We had about 2,200 endorsements, including, gosh, probably nearly 60 at this point, statewide organizations that endorsed it, including unions. We had multiple unions, like Matt mentioned, pass divestment resolutions. Those were included in our petition that we delivered to the Treasury Department. We also had call and email pressure campaigns, so people could call the Treasury Department, email the treasurer, and we had, toolkits with call scripts and all of that people could just take and adapt themselves. So it mattered, I think, a whole lot that people felt that they could do something that mattered and that was within their means. And that's what we aimed to set up. And I think part of this, too, was also the structure that we had as a coalition. This was really, really important, how we organized ourselves. We had kind of an informal kind of core group of organizers, some of who are speaking here today, and then this step in, step out approach or model that allowed really anybody, so individuals, pensioners, other organizations, largely other organizations around the state, to get involved to the degree in which they wanted. So we focused on creating tools and opportunities for them to engage their specific community or their specific constituencies to get involved. And it was really, really productive. And I think lent to a coalition that was able to spread this campaign throughout the whole state. I realize we are almost at 8 o'clock and we haven't gotten to our Q&A. So if you want to stick around maybe another 15 minutes after 8 o'clock for Q&A, please do. I understand if you have to leave. But yeah, we should have timed this a little bit more. So I think we can move on just very briefly to share a little bit about clarifying what this victory is and what it isn't. So I'm going to let Matt share a little bit about this. That work, Matt? There you go.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that we wanted to do this whole webinar is because there hasn't been a whole lot of press coverage on this, and I'm cynical enough not to be surprised. I mean, doing Palestine organizing, they don't cover this issue in general very well. Well, very well from the standpoint of like what's actually going on. And then also they don't want to cover a threat that shows that a group of people can sort of scrappy group of people can come together and break a 30-year financial connection between the state of Israel and the state of Michigan. So, we made this happen, and we talked to a whole bunch of media, and we didn't get a whole lot of bites. I mean, we got, if anybody's in Michigan knows Nolan Finley, he's kind of like this right-wing reactionary kind of resentment politic that he actually gave us probably maybe the most coverage in the state. He kind of like freaked out and had his editorial about it. So so what happened, what we did, the state of Michigan has been investing for about 30 years in these Israel bonds, very long-standing relationship. And it is not at all a coincidence that they have now, for the first time in 3 decades, declined to reinvest. They no longer have any financial investment in Israel bonds. So the state treasury spokesperson, his name is Ron Lex, issued a statement. He says, quote, it does not reflect, meaning their decision to cut their investment in Israel bonds. It does not reflect any change in policy or position regarding the state of Israel, and to insinuate otherwise is false. Importantly, the State of Michigan Investment Board has not adopted any policies that discourage or prohibit future investment in Israel bonds. Technically, that is true. They do not have a policy that prohibits Israel bonds. Like when Russia invaded Ukraine, the state of Michigan retirement system did enact a policy saying we're going to drop all investments in Russia and Belarus, and we're not going to repurchase them. There is no policy that they issued. I mean, that we're required that 5-member investment board, the majority of which to pass a policy. That was not going to happen. And the politicians will only go so far. They're not going to say that. Unfortunately, they're not going to say that we're not going to invest in Israel as a policy. I mean, they should. Obviously, what's going on in Palestine is one of the worst crimes of our lifetime. But actions do speak louder than words, and the fact that they have dropped this investment says everything that needs to be said. Really, we ended this investment relationship. They do not. The political entities, which I'm not surprised, don't necessarily have the courage to say why. And in fact, if you look across the country, in Ohio, North Carolina, this just happened. There are other public investors that are dropping their investment in Israel bonds, and they never say because genocide or nor would they say we're doing it in response to a dynamic movement that has been building on the ground for the rights of the Palestinian people. They come up with some reason. They say, well, just financial reasons. We're just doing it because of the market or something. But we know, and I think everybody knows what's going on. This is a trend that's happening across the country and will continue so long as people continue to organize this. So that's where we are, and I hope we set the record straight a little bit on that. Oh, I will say just one last thing on that point. One of the more interesting Freedom of Information Act request results that we got at the very end, we needed to see if they held the Israel bond, if they reinvested. So we put in a request for that. And we also put a request for any communications about Israel bonds. We did see throughout October, so this is just weeks before the bond matured, we saw that the Israel Bonds National Managing Director of Corporate and Institutional Sales personally calling the Chief Investment Officer for the retirement system, begging him to continue their investment. He was talking about, we've had this 30-year relationship. You were one of our first public clients, and we really hope that you stay with us. They know what's up. Israel Bonds knows what's up. I mean, throughout this whole campaign, we never had any direct interactions with Israel Bonds itself as an institution, but they know what's going on, and the fact that that he was calling the chief investment officer and giving him his personal cell phone number means that they realize we're a threat. So we hope that this information can be helpful to people who are fighting for Palestinian rights across the country. And I think, Anna, do you want to talk about what's next and we can get into Q&A?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So in terms of what's next, obviously, like Matt said, this is not a divestment policy, right? Israel has not been placed on Michigan's divestment acts, right? So until that is true, we will continue to monitor the state of Michigan investment portfolio for the retirement system to make sure that there are no more Israel bonds. If Israel bonds appear again in our future FOIA requests, we will show up again. We have a whole statewide coalition of folks who are at the ready now to say, do not invest our public pension and taxpayer funds in genocide, in apartheid, and occupation. So that's one thing that will be ongoing for Michigan Divest. We are also looking at other targets, right? So our goal is to continue to leverage our statewide movement to identify where Michigan taxpayer funds are being allocated to Israel's genocide and apartheid regime. So that research is ongoing. We welcome folks who are in Michigan to join us. I'll have Muhammad put the link in the chat for folks to sign up just to get updates, or if you want to get further involved as we start thinking about, in the new year, where to take this energy next. We will also be holding more public meetings for people to kind of step in, step out, and continue this work towards divesting Michigan taxpayer funds from Israeli apartheid. So with that, I think we can move on now to Q&A. I think Mohammed has been collecting some of the questions, but I think we've been fielding some of those as best we can. I think something that we can create after this too is maybe just a FAQ we could send out to folks along with the recording, so that some of your questions get answered. I appreciate all of you who can hang out a little bit longer. If you have a question, please use the raise hand, and then I can unmute you, and you can ask your question. All right, first I see, let me see, Camille. All right, Camille, or Camille.
Hi.
Wrong. Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this. I'm coming from Virginia, where we're running a divestment campaign. I'm not targeting Israeli bonds specifically, but targeting investment in weapons companies and Maersk. And we are a mostly ununionized state, and I was wondering if you had any strategy for reaching non-unionized workers or organizing non-unionized workers.
Seems like a Matt question.
Well, with our petition, anybody could sign. I don't know enough about Virginia's, investments in their systems. I think you said it's a retirement system. I mean, our campaign was in such a way, was connected in such a way where anybody in the state could sign the petition, and that would matter from a sort of becoming involved and lending your voice standpoint. In a lot of our, most of our pensioners that were in the system, we signed them up not through their union. So that counted. We had hundreds of people in that category. It certainly helps to have the unions on board, but there are also non-union organizations, like in the state of Michigan. There's what's called the state SARA, State Employee Retirees Association, I think it's called. Happened to be one of the local unions that endorsed our petition. Happened to be the head of SARA, so we had a connection there. But the idea is there are retiree associations that are not necessarily unions that are potential targets. Just some initial thoughts.
Okay. Next on the list, I see Teto. Work.
I think so. Thanks for taking my question. Yeah, I'm calling from Los Angeles. This is really exciting to hear, and I really appreciated the overview. My question was about if you could say a little bit more about how you organize yourselves and like the steering committee, the monthly meetings, a little bit about like the amount of folks that made up sort of like the core group of folks that participated in meetings or any of the actions. Could you just say a little bit more about that, please?
You want to do it?
No, you can go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think you're in a great position to do that.
Yeah, so initially when we started the campaign, so Matt's actually out in the Detroit area. I'm here in the capital area. We knew early on that if we were going to target the State of Michigan Investment Board, they're here in the capital. So I think Matt realized, okay, there's these bonds. I need to connect with folks who are in the area where we can start those actions. And so I think the coalition largely started in the capital area and then grew out from there. But it really, we connected with folks in different, various organizations in kind of key cities. So Detroit, Lansing, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Ann Arbor, kind of those big hubs where there were a lot of folks doing pretty serious organizing, and getting them further involved, getting them to have representatives who were kind of part of this coalition and stayed plugged in. And then over time, I think kind of the informal kind of structure grew. in terms of who is kind of helping lead the campaign going forward. But we did hold, so we had like a core group of folks who kind of helped steer. And then we had kind of monthly meetings for the larger coalition, so folks all over the state or anybody, individuals who could just chime in. And we usually use that time to talk about strategy, talking about, okay, we have a petition, how we're going to administer the petition. We also talked about, the strategy for the investment board meetings. Everybody got to have a voice and weigh in on the types of questions we posed to them. Everybody had the opportunity during these meetings to weigh in on the strategy we would take at the next State of Michigan Investment Board meeting. And so, yeah, it was kind of fluid in terms of the groups who would come and go from the coalition. I hope that answers your question. Does that answer that? I don't know. Oh, you can't.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate
perfect.
it.
Okay, next on my list, I see Anne. Did that work, Anne?
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much, not only for all the work that you've done to put this together, but also for now helping us understand. I'm sure groups in other states must benefit from this, and what they can't get today, they now kind of know who to reach out to. You guys could just sell yourselves out as not for money, but as a consultant to all the different states. It makes me think, and that's my main question. Probably most of the people on this chat know that boycott movie that came out, which showed that Israel got all sorts of states to institute laws that said that if you did not agree to not boycott, that you had to agree to not boycott, and if you didn't sign that, you couldn't be like a federal employee. And in the boycott movie, you saw a audiology or speech therapist who was fired, or in fact almost fired, and a lawyer and different people. But in other articles I've read recently, some of that horrendous stuff that happened has not gone as well, so I just wondered, since you are in the BDS framework, if you knew anything about the current status of that. Do you know what I'm talking about, Matt and Anna? That movie and that movement? You're familiar with it?
I'm not 100% clear on your question. Are you asking about the state of Michigan's anti-BDS law?
The three states in the movie that they emphasized were Texas and Arizona and somewhere in the Midwest. But they made it clear in the movie that that same kind of statement was happening in virtually every state in the union, and it was going under the radar so that most employees did not know that when they joined and became an employee, they had signed something that said they would never participate in a boycott BDS, because if they did, they could be fired. And that was the whole point of the movie, to try to get the word out that this underhanded, sneaky system had been put in place. And just before, whether you can answer it or not, but just before I go, I did come to at least one of the divestment meetings in Lansing, and I attended one on phone. And I just wanted the audience to know how there were somewhere, the one I attended, there were maybe 30 or 40 of us in the room. And I had no way of knowing if anybody was going to speak against what was happening. And I was maybe the 25th person to speak. And by the time I spoke, there was just consistent, adamant, empathic, imploring comments explaining from their point of view what was happening in Gaza, or just the horrific nature of what was happening in Palestine. And it killed me that the committee stayed so stone-faced. So when I did my speech, I made them answer me. I made them nod at a question I asked. I wanted them to become humans and not just robots. But I had no idea what you've just explained to me, that one of them was the key person that really was making the decision. They were sitting there hearing story after story after story. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the chief investment officer, his name's John Brodigan. He was
Okay.
there at all the meetings, so he heard you.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. In relation to Michigan, I mean, Michigan does have an anti-BDS law,
It
right?
does.
If you are a state employee,
Mhm.
sorry, if you hear my kid in the background, if you're a state employee, you technically, if you're a state employee or you contract with the state,
Uh-huh.
right? You have to say that you will not boycott any, what are they called? Strategic partners? Is that the language, Matt? So
Yeah, so it's even narrower than that. I mean that it's state contractors, the way that Michigan's law works, and this is an important question because people all over the country, need to know their own anti-BDS laws. And so the way it works in Michigan, I can speak to Michigan. I mean, it's roughly similar in a lot of states. More than half the states in the country have it. In Michigan, it's just a few revisions to the Management and Budget Act. People want to look it up because I encourage you to look it up because it's actually a very weak law. MCL 18.12, 61 subsection 12 and 15 and 1241C. All it does is prohibit contractors. Like if you want to sell oranges to the state of Michigan, you have to say, in order to have a contract for oranges, Orange Company pledge not to boycott Israel. And that the way that Michigan enforces it, it's only to contractors. And we have to be very careful about this because state employees get worried about this, and people ask, like, can I sign this? I'm a state employee. They don't require the state does not require state employees to sign anything. And by the way, the whole law is unconstitutional. If that matters at all. And I've been looking for a way to overturn it because it's a horrible law. But yeah, it's a very narrowly drafted law, and they don't even use the word Israel. They use strategic partner. You have to look up in the federal code to see what the hell they're even talking about. But any contract that you have with that anybody has a procurement contract with the state of Michigan has this language that they will not boycott a strategic partner. That most people who sign it don't even know it. But yeah, it doesn't pose any threat to what we're trying to do, nor does it apply to most BDS projects in our state or in the country. So don't be scared of it. I mean, you should know the law, but don't be scared of it. I think what it is a target for company. Another aspect of the law is it targets companies like corporate America. Like let's say Coca-Cola has a state contract with the state of Michigan, and we were trying to pressure Coca-Cola to drop its participation in the genocide. They might have some problems because more than half the states in the country, their contracts with those states might be in jeopardy. But yeah, it's pretty narrow.
Okay, thank you very much. And I just can't thank you enough for all the work you did. It was very easy to come in. Annie, you personally invited me in and told me to come back, and it just made it so easy to come into the whole situation.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. Anne.
Okay, next I see Philip.
That
work?
Yeah, just a second. I'm trying to also get video. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I have a question about like is the Michigan retirement system still holding some bonds, those 30-year bonds, or they don't have any Israel bonds whatsoever in that portfolio?
No, so there's no bonds currently at all.
Okay.
So the retirement, just to clarify, the retirement system didn't hold 30-year bonds. It held, what we were trying to say is that it has held at any point in time for 30 years,
right,
Israel bonds. Some of these
right.
are, 1-year bonds, 2-year bonds,
right.
They have varying maturity periods.
Sure.
So yeah, just to clarify that. And we learned that from the FOIA request. The bondsman from the Development Corporation for Israel, stating in emails that they've had a 3-decade relationship with the chief investment officer. And the Treasury Department, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to also say I also am in Virginia and I'm somewhat connected to the effort in Virginia. But I also want to say I'm very active with my group, Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace, is very active with churches. And I know the Methodists have divested from Israel bonds and maybe also the Presbyterians, I'm not sure. Presbyterians. Did you work with any faith-based organizations on your campaign?
Yeah, so we had there were several I think different faith-based institutions that endorsed the demands publicly and were included in our petition. There's the link to the actual report. I put all that in the chat, so if you guys can scroll up, there's some really helpful links in there if you want to just open them and save them. And then in addition to that, we had an interfaith network, Palestine Interfaith Network, which is a group in Michigan of various different faith institutions that were involved, many of whom were in the capital area. So they were actually very present at the State of Michigan Investment Board meetings in person, many of whom were retirees or had pensions in the system. So yes, faith-based groups were definitely involved and a key constituent of our coalition. Matt, did you have something to add to that?
No, you said it well.
Okay. Gosh, so many hands raised. Let's see. Oh, wait, these already had. Oh, I see. Okay. Next I see Nala. Unmute you. Did I pronounce your name right?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, this is Nahla Saleh from Columbus, Ohio Divest. Thank you so much
Oh, yes.
for everything you guys have done. It's an inspiration, and we hope to continue to learn from you and take on some of this work here in Ohio. You talked a little bit about the warm working relationship that you were able to develop with the chief investment officer and how he continued to allow you to come back again and again and meet with him and his team, I'm assuming. What are some of if you could just talk a little bit more about your approach with that at the public meetings, were your questions like intentionally phrased in such a way to not be accusatory, or did you have a specific sort of tone in your questioning? Because I think that's important, and that is important when we think about strategizing for these public meetings. And I know that there's a difference in opinion, and you can't always control, how people ask their questions. But yeah, I'd like to learn a little bit more about how you were able to create that warm relationship.
Yeah. I think I hinted at this a little bit, but when we had that first meeting with the chief investment officer, we purposefully had questions that allowed him to talk about his role and explain more about what he does and doesn't do, to kind of allow him to open up about his level of power. And we were inquisitive. The other thing is we did not target individuals. We did not attack the chief investment officer for making this decision, right? Because we don't know anything about him, right? Other than this is his job. He had been making decisions, based on, parameters and policies and the level of risk of for the investment portfolio, because that's his job. And so we did not take an accusatory or kind of demeaning approach in those meetings with him. We didn't want to make any assumptions about why he made these decisions. And he wasn't going to share either about any political reasoning for why he made this decision when he did. We ultimately don't know. And so some of that, so a combination of, we didn't make any assumptions. We allowed him to just kind of open up about his role. And interestingly, and maybe this is just who he was. I'm going to put this in the chat, but there's two question guides here. These are two of the question guides we used for those public meetings. You can feel free to look at them. The first one, which was in April, we largely didn't even need to ask these. He just willingly gave this information to us and more. Like he would not stop talking. And I don't know if it was just who was in the room. So I saw someone earlier ask, like, how did we kind of credential who we were? In these meetings, we were very clear about who each of the individuals were, because they only allowed 4 people to attend these meetings. So we were pretty strategic about who was in the room. Like we made sure to have a Palestinian voice, a pension holder voice, Matt, obviously with his law background. And we also had someone who's not here today who was involved in divestment from South Africa, both at the state and in DC. So we had like a myriad of folks in the room who I think lent to the credibility as well. And these were the people that he was seeing in the investment board meetings time and time again. We kept showing up. So hopefully the questions there are helpful. So you can probably see in some of the questions, we weren't accusatory, we were inquisitive, just trying to gain a level of understanding. We also used it as an opportunity to share with them about, or to gauge what they knew about what was happening in Gaza, about apartheid, right? And so in some of that line of questioning, we did learn that the chief investment officer was doing some research, maybe on his own, or had some interest in trying to understand what divestment or non-reinvestment in Israel bonds looked like in other states. And we were able to share some of that information with him as well. I hope that answers your question. So yeah, it was a combination of lots of things.
Can I add something on that?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Nala's question is so important, and it was quite surreal actually. After we learned about the win, we had already scheduled a meeting with the chief investment officer, and we basically like ran through how, like, could you tell us basically how we won, Mr. Chief Investment Officer? And he told us. I mean, we're so deliberative about being really strong on the issue. Like we were not afraid. We were talking about really horrible things at these investment board meetings, which they were completely out of their element. They're not used to people coming to these meetings and doing that. I mean, there were like people in suits that were crying. I mean, people showing up. We were very, severe on the issue, like the genocide, and talking about what that looked like on the ground. But we were very deliberative not to be personal to any of these people. We certainly could have called people names, and I mean, maybe they would have, people would have deserved it, government officials, but they told us as a big factor in them, meeting with us and continuing the relationship is that we didn't do that. And them like telling us that was very interesting to hear them basically affirm our choices. They didn't have to meet with us. Like if we had gone hard on them from the beginning, started calling them all sorts of things, we probably wouldn't have got a meeting with. It would have been a complete wall, and we wouldn't have gotten that access.
Yeah, I want to echo what Matt said. Like when we had that last meeting with them, we asked them specifically, what did we do that was impactful for you? And one of the first things that came to both the deputy chief investment officer and the chief investment officer was our demeanor for lack of a better word, our decor, our decorum, that we weren't, what did they say? We were passionate but respectful, I think was paraphrasing what they said. It mattered a whole lot, that we just had a tone that was welcoming and somewhat firm but friendly. Okay, let's see. I see next on the list, Shivani. Let me unmute you. I hope I pronounced your name right.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm from CUNY Law SJP. We're in New York, and we filed a lawsuit for disclosure. So we're hoping and working on that. And I think once we get disclosure, like we want to really push and build out this campaign for divestment. And also we're working on divestment side by side with numbers we have from 2014. I guess my question is, and maybe if I missed this, sorry, but if how involved like universities were, or if that's like kind of its own beast in Michigan, and like how, because we're trying to, within our university system, which is a public system, push for divestment, specifically like about bonds, and then also other types of purchase orders and contracts. And so, yeah, just curious how it worked with decision makers and institutions and universities, or if those were separate things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like Matt, you might be able to answer that since there were several universities. Okay. So there were several universities who had retirements in the state of Michigan retirement system. So they weren't universities like Michigan State University or University of Michigan. They were much smaller ones. So there were some constituencies there. And, I mean, obviously faculty at those universities, but some student organizing. So I don't know, Matt, if you want to talk a little bit, because I know you were connected a little bit more with students.
Sure. Yeah, the way the Michigan's retirement system is set up, where they like in segments at various points in the 90s and further, they cut off defined benefit pensions for certain groups. We had a very odd sort of system. All the community colleges were in it, and that's the most colleges, higher ed, I guess you could say that's the most engaged, active part of higher ed. There were some universities, like scattered universities throughout Michigan that were in the system up until I think 1997. I know it's so weird, but I mean, what we tried to do is say that, these like we look them up, like Eastern Michigan University hasn't been in the system for new employees for about 30 years, but they still contribute millions of dollars every year, as part of their obligations. So we tried to mobilize students that were saying basically, your university tax dollars are going into this, as well as, faculty, even if they weren't on the systems, they were creating the wealth that was, going into it. But we didn't, we weren't able to thread that kind of needle. It was, we tried, but we did have a lot of student organizations. The University of Michigan had a very active Palestine movement. It wasn't directly related to the system other than the fact that they were Michigan residents, but they were a big help to us. But it sounds quite different from what you're dealing with.
Yeah, folks were involved a little bit, helping get the petition out. Student groups were definitely really pivotal in some of that, in especially the Ann Arbor area. But I think something that, and this, I mean, it's not super related to what you're saying, but something that has come out of this victory has been an interest from student groups in hearing about our approach, and wanting, some additional, I guess, kind of like a consultant sort of approach from folks who had worked on a statewide campaign, to see what could be adapted for the university context. And we've certainly been wanting to help in that regard. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Maybe it sort of doesn't, but yeah, certainly a different context. Okay, I don't see any more hands raised. I'm going to see, Mohammed, was there any questions that folks had in the chat that you want to make sure that we answer? Let me unmute you.
I do have to go in just a minute. I know.
Oh,
I'm
you're good.
one of the-
I think we've covered everything. Thanks
Okay.
for doing that. Yeah.
Thanks, Mohammed. Well, thank you all so much for taking time out of your Monday to spend time with us and ask really great questions, and to hear more about, you know, what we were able to do and how this links to the movements happening in other states. It was so great to hear so many people from other states on this call. I hope that we can all stay in touch. Certainly reach out to us. Here's our this is our email if you want to contact us. I'll put that in the chat. Or if you're on Instagram, you can just message us. It's probably me who will answer you. So yes, thank you so much, everybody. If you have questions or just want to pick our brains, or if you want to jump on a private meeting with us, talk strategy, we are more than happy to do that. We've been doing that with groups in other states since our victory. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are more than happy to just talk strategy and talk shop, because we're in this for the long haul, and we want to see the domino effect. We want to see more Israel bonds drop from retirement systems and other investments across the country. So with that, I'll let everyone go. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks again so much for being here. Free Palestine.
Thanks, everybody.